Hello everyone, my name is Ricardo, and if you're looking to learn how to improve your cyber incident response capabilities, you're in the right place. In this course, we'll be exploring how to create meaningful plans, processes, and procedures that will step up your cybersecurity game. When we talk about process and documentation, the majority of people roll their eyes thinking it's something secondary and boring. They all think that just having the proper technology is enough for cyber resilience, and that documentation is something to be done just not get caught in an audit. But in this course, I want to prove you the opposite. I want to show you that a well-planned and well-documented process can improve your incident handling and security resilience. You'll learn how to create meaningful plans, processes, and procedures that will decrease your time to resolve incidents, which can be the difference between a small contained incident and a massive data breach. So before we get started, let's take a quick look on what we'll be covering in this course. We'll start by having an introduction, where you have an overview of the incident management process. Then, you learn how to understand your company and gather the requirements for your documentation. Then, you learn how to write a meaningful incident response plan. And by meaningful, I mean a plan that is not only for audits, but mainly to actually improve your incident response capabilities. Then, we'll discuss about the incident response process, which is the core of the incident response plan. Then, we'll discuss about the security procedures, which are external documents that details how things are done. Then, you learn how can you evaluate the process through KPIs and make sure your security capabilities are improving. Then, we'll talk about some additional artifacts that can improve your team performance, like the use of knowledge bases and cybersecurity repositories. And finally, we will have the course closure section, in which we'll summarize what we learned and we'll talk about what we can start to do today. So before we get started in our course, let me formally introduce myself. I'm Ricardo, it is nice to meet you. I'm a security consultant with more than 10 years of experience in IT. I've provided consultants for a variety of clients, from banks to government agencies. And my main focus is in incident response, SOC management, and SIEM solutions. I'm also a course author in those three areas: incident investigation, SIEM administration, and wireless penetration testing. Also, you can find on my blog, which is thecuraterinsights.com, or on my LinkedIn. But enough of me, let's get our course started. To improve our incident response capabilities, first thing we need to do is to understand the general incident management process. This process has 6 phases. The first one is the preparation. Here's everything that we do before the incident, including deploying security solutions, training our team, and of course, writing and rehearsing the incident response plan. The second phase is the detection phase. Here's when your security systems, such as your SIEM solution, detects that is an intrusion. It's also here where we do a basic investigation and determine the extent of the incident. The third phase is the containment, in which your main objective is stopping the threat. This may be closing a firewall port or even disconnecting a server. The idea is just stopping the attack as soon as possible. In the next phase, called eradication, the idea is investigating the root cause and cleaning up the threat. For example, removing the malware that the attacker installed, or patching the system, or removing backdoors that were created, and etc. Then, we have the recovery phase. And here, the idea is restoring the business as it was before the attack. For example, if we had a ransomware outbreak, the recovery will be restoring files from backups and testing the systems. Then, the last phase is the post-incident analysis, which in my opinion is one of the most important parts and is also the part that most people neglect. Here is where we sit and figure out what could have done better and how we can prevent the incident from happening again. The creation of plan, process, and procedures are related to the first phase, the preparation phase. But those artifacts will define how other phases are executed. So having a good preparation will directly impact in the detection, containment, eradication, recovery, and analysis. So let's take a closer look on what's in the preparation phase, which is basically everything we do before an incident happens. This phase includes the security systems you install, such as firewalls, SIEM solutions, antivirus, and etc. It also includes the security trainings for employees. For example, instant investigation training for SOC analysts, secure development training for developers, phishing training for your employees, and so on. And the third thing that preparation includes is the security plans, processes, and procedures, which is the focus of this course. A good cybersecurity strategy includes a strong investment in those three pillars: products, people, and process. Think about that. A good security system without the right people is not effective at all. In the same way that the right people, but without a right process, it also is not effective. So remember the three P's: product, people, and process. So, since last item is the focus of our course, let's dive deeper into what kind of plans, process, and procedures we should implement. So the first artifact is a cyber incident response plan. It targets all audiences, meaning that it should be followed by all stakeholders, from your CISO to your security analyst. Also, one important thing to remember is this document tells you what to do, but not how to do. For example, your incident response plan may say, if a ransomware is detected in one machine, isolate the machine. Note that the plan is telling you what to do, but doesn't tell you how to log into the firewall and how to create a blocking rule, for example. The second artifact is the cyber incident response process. Basically, this process is part of the plan and details the sequence of the tasks in case of an incident. It also defines the owners of each task of an incident, which is very important. The thing to remember is that the process is the step-by-step of an incident. It is like the cake recipe when the incident happens. Also, another important artifact is the security procedures. Those documents are external to the cyber incident response plan, but supports the plan by defining how things are done. Those are very technical procedures, detailing the step-by-step of how to do things in the tools. For example, you can have one security procedure for how to isolate a machine, which would include a detailed step-by-step of how to log into the firewall, how to create the rule, how to block the traffic, and etc. Again, this is a very technical document and should contain screenshots of the tools showing how to do things. Also, one very important document is the communication plan. This is a guideline for internal and external communications and is extremely important in critical incidents. For example, this document will have guidelines on how to report an incident and even how to answer questions from the press. And the last document I want to talk about is the recovery plans. This is a document that is shared between the security team and the IT teams. It has details on how to restore the systems. For example, if a laptop gets infected with ransomware, how to restore the machine using the backups. The good news is that you learn in this course how to create each one of those documents. For better organization, me, Ricardo, I like to have the incident response process and the communication plan inside the incident response plan, and have the security procedures and recovery plans in separate documents. In this way, things are more centralized and organized. So, to make this course more interactive, let's come up with a course scenario. Let's say the company ABC hired us to improve the performance of their security team by implementing a better process and plans. The company ABC provides financial advisory to its clients. This company currently has one generic incident response plan, which a security analyst created after the last audit. You know how it is. The auditors complain of the lack of security plan, so the guy googled incident response plan, put the company logo, and that's it. We all have seen this before, right? The problem is, the company recently had a critical security breach in which customer data was leaked. And worse than that, during the investigation, which is supposed to be confidential, the security analyst leaked the investigation information. He posted on Twitter, "One more security breach. I told them that would happen. Hashtag I knew it." That's amazing, right? To get even worse, later he posted, "Anyone with experience in reviewing McAfee logs? I need some help." And of course, hashtag work is killing me. I don't even need to tell you how this is terrible. First, clients from that company heard through a security analyst that there was a security breach, which puts down the trust in the company. Also, any hacker now knows that a company used McAfee antivirus. That's a great job, right? Also, in this incident, it took 18 days to investigate and close the incident. And according to the SOC manager, there was a lot of people passing the responsibility around. Which means a lot of people saying, oh, it's not my responsibility. That's terrible, right? Unfortunately, this happens more than we wish. If you connect the dots, you see that some of the artifacts that we discussed in the last slide would avoid this trouble. For example, if we had a proper communication plan, the analysts would know that they should never post work things on their Twitter. Also, if we have a proper incident response process, we have well-defined owners in the investigation tasks, so people will not be passing the responsibility around. If in the process one person is assigned to a task, the person cannot say it's not their responsibility. So now that we have the scenario, which may be familiar to a lot of companies, let's take a look at what you, as a consultant, can do to improve this process. One of the first things to do when starting a new client is to understand the company and the client requirements. Actually, even if you're developing a process from your own company, and even if you have been working there for years, it is extremely important to sit, understand, and write down the company inner workings and requirements. By understanding the company, I mean understanding how the company is organized. For example, the security teams, the NOC teams, the support teams, and etc. Also, it is important to gather documentation that is already in place and try to read it. Even if the documentation is poor, you may find some interesting stuff. Also, you should have an understanding of the business hierarchy of the company. For example, is the security department part of the IT department? Or does the CISO report to the CIO or to the CEO? And so on. Also, it is important to understand the main issues. For example, what is the main complaint of the SOC team? It could be lack of ownership, lack of communication, and any other issue that you identify. On top of understanding the company, you need to understand the requirements of the company. For example, does the company need to comply with any regulation? Like PCI, SOX, HIPAA, ISO 27001, or any other? If yes, you may need to read the regulation requirements and consider it when developing the plans and procedures. Also, if your company has vendors and clients, you may need to review the agreements to understand what is required from your company. For example, let's say your company provides IT services for a bank. Then in the contract between your company and the bank, they may have put a clause saying that if your company gets hacked, then you need to inform the bank in maximum 24 hours. So keep in mind the requirements from your clients and vendors. One of the best ways to understanding your company and identifying requirements is interviewing key stakeholders in the corporation. So here's a list of people that you should talk to better understand the company. First and foremost, the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO. The CISO can give a good overview of the business hierarchy, teams, and departments. The CISO can also help to identify regulatory compliance requirements and even point out the common issues that he or she had been observing. The second person to interview is the security managers. They can provide you with a good information about the security tools that are in place and how the security is divided. He or she can also be very valuable to identify key personnel, or in other words, people that are important for the security of the company. And the third person to interview is the SOC manager. The SOC manager can give you a good overview of the team structure as well as the current documentation. Also, you could discuss with your SOC manager about the last instance and the most common issues, so you can identify areas of improvement. Another key stakeholder to talk to is the SOC analysts. Most of people neglect them, but those are the people doing the day-to-day incident investigation. They are the people that know what is working and what could be improved. They can also give another point of view in terms of the last instance and common mistakes. And trust me, sometimes the analyst knows way more than the managers, so it is important to listen to what they have to say. And we should never forget about the non-security people, such as the IT managers. Those people will give you good insights on how things work in the other parts of the IT department, such as Network Operations Center, patching teams, and etc. Also, the IT managers will work with you on the recovery procedures. And also, the IT managers can help you to identify key technical staff in other IT sections. As the cyber incident response plans and procedures are extremely important, there are several industry guidelines that will help you when creating your artifacts. But I want to present to you my two favorite ones. The first one is the NIST SP 861, which is developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This document is called Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, and it contains details on how to implement a full incident management cycle, from preparation to post-incident. If you're planning to become a security consultant, you should definitely read this document. The second guideline that I want to present to you is the ISO 27001, which is developed by the International Organization of Standardization. This document is called Information Security Standards and basically is a framework for policies and procedures. The interesting thing is that those policies and procedures cover every aspect of security, from asset management to physical security. Again, if you're planning to become a professional security consultant, you should check this out. But you may be wondering, why to create a custom documentation if they have public available templates? Why can't I just change some wording, put my logo, and use it? Trust me, this is the mistake that most of the companies do. Using a generic documentation will bring almost no benefit to your company. And that's because those templates were developed for the general public. Your company may have different departments and may have a different structure. And also, you may have or not have some of the technologies they mention. So it is very important to write something that fits your company. Also, if you've done your homework and talked to your stakeholders, you know the pain points of your company. So you can write process that fix those bottlenecks and improve your security capabilities. So, my recommendation is, take a look on the security guidelines that I mentioned, read them and understand them. But do write your process from scratch. Only include things that are relevant for your company. And try to write a document that contains useful information for people. Do not create a document just for the audit. So before wrapping up this module, I want to summarize for you some keys for success and keys for failure when designing the plans and process for your client. The first key to success is to consider the input from all stakeholders when developing your plans and processes. And that includes interviewing your CISO, the security managers, the SOC managers, and even the security analysts. The second key for success is to understand the requirements and write process and plans considering the client needs. The third key for success is to test the process, get feedback from stakeholders, and improve the documentation. Don't just write the document and that's it. You should rehearse the process and plans and make sure that everyone's comfortable with it. The fourth key for success is to clearly define the owners for tasks, so you can avoid people that pass their responsibility when things happen. And the last key for success is to define a clear communication plan, which you'll learn more in the next modules. On the other hand, we have the keys for failure, which is things that if you do, for sure your process will not be as effective as it could. The first key for failure is to use an incident response plan from a previous client or a generic template from the internet. If you do that, no one will follow your process. The second key for failure is to not review the process with all stakeholders. Some people consider only the input from management and don't hear the staff that is dealing with the instance on a daily basis. If you do that, you'll be missing critical improvements ideas that a security analyst may have. The third key for failure is to only update documents when the audit is close by. We all have seen this before. In the week before the audit, the analysts rush to update the document. After the audit is done, no one touches the document until the next year. And that's a very bad practice. And the last key for failure is to define the tasks but not define the owners. If you do that, in a critical instant, some people will jump out of the boat saying that it's not their responsibility. You don't want that to happen, do you? In this module, we'll talk about the Cyber Incident Response Plan, which is the main artifact in your security capabilities. When we talk about creating a plan and process, most of the people think only on the document writing part. However, to create a proper plan, you need to observe closely the security teams, so you can analyze what is working and what is not. And based on that, you can come up with an improved plan and process. Only after understanding the company is that you can write the document with the plan and processes. And that's exactly the reason that in this module, we not only talk about how to write the document, but also how to understand the company environment and how to write an efficient incident response plan. So before getting started, let's take a look at what we'll be covering in this module. We start by having an overview of the document and discussing some of the industry standards for response plans. Then we'll talk about the stakeholder section of the document, which contains the company hierarchy, the RACI metrics, and much more. Then we'll go to the definitions part of the plan, which contains information about the data classification and incident severity. Then we go to one of the most important parts of the plan, which is the incident response process. It is this process that gives the step-by-step that will be followed during the incident. Then we talk about incident scenarios, which is where we plan the response for each individual incident type. Then we have a quick overview of the communication plan, which defines how the communication is done internally and externally. Then we talk a little bit about incident simulations, which will help you to identify gaps and bottlenecks in your process. And last, but very important, we will discuss some keys for success when writing an incident response plan. So to get this module started, I want to introduce you to an industry standard called NIST SP 861. In the previous module, I already mentioned about it, but here I want to focus on the section 2.3. This section provides a general idea of what should be in an incident response plan. All the major companies adopt these standards as base for their process and plans. The interesting thing about this standard is that it puts a lot of emphasis in the role definition and distribution of responsibilities. It contains a lot of good information on those topics, as well as a good section on how to write a communication plan. So, if you're not familiar with this industry standard, I do recommend you reading it before creating your incident response plan. So let's get started by discussing about the stakeholder sections of your plan. This section is extremely important, especially if you're in a medium or large company. When creating your plan, one of the first things to do is trying to understand the company hierarchy, which means how the employees are organized. If you're working for a new client, you can request the HR for a hierarchy chart and it'll provide you with something like this. This hierarchy chart is very useful to understand who reports to who. And as this information is very valuable during incident investigation, we include it in your incident response plan. The company hierarchy chart contains only the roles and the relation. However, during incident, we need to know who are the people that we need to contact. So we have the list of stakeholders exactly for this reason. It is a list of the employees and their roles in the company. This list should also contain contact information, such as email, phone number, and etc. And this list can be interesting to define the team hierarchy and also escalation plans. Also, this list should include not only technical people, but also non-technical staff. For example, if during an incident you find out that an employee is selling data to other company, you may need to contact the HR manager to talk about the case. So remember a core scenario, the company ABC. So yes, here's the list of stakeholders for them. Note that this is a very simple list containing literally any person that may be involved in a security incident. From the CISO to the SOC analyst. From the HR manager to the public relations person. And trust me, this will be very useful during an incident. In the stakeholders section, we should also define the roles and responsibilities in the plan. We need to define who is responsible for what, which means we need to define the main tasks during incident response and cross-reference it with people from the stakeholder list. There are several ways of doing this cross-reference, but my favorite one is using a rehearsed matrix. If you're familiar with project management, you probably know it. It is a matrix that for each task defines who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. I will show this matrix in 1 second, but one thing to remember is that each task should have one and only one accountable person. I don't recommend having more than one accountable person per task, so you can avoid people passing the bucket to another people during an incident. So here's an example of a rehearsed matrix for our client ABC. In the rows, I define the main tasks related to the incident response. For example, investigating a low priority incident, medium priority incident, and etc. Also, running scans, troubleshooting SIEM issues, patching servers, modifying firewall rules, disabling accounts, and so on. In the columns, I define the stakeholders, like SOC analyst, SOC manager, compliance manager, and so on. And note that I also include non-IT people, like HR manager, public relations, and so on. Then, in the middle cells, I define the role of each stakeholder, which can be responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. For example, for the first role, which is the investigation of a low priority incident, the SOC analyst is responsible for investigating the incident, and the SOC manager is accountable for the incident investigation. During the investigation, the SOC analyst may consult the NOC team or the patching team if they have any questions. On the other hand, if we have a higher critical incident, the analyst is still responsible for the investigation, and the SOC manager is still accountable for the incident. But as it's a critical incident, the compliance manager should be informed, as well as the CISO and the public relations team. As I mentioned, each task has one and only one accountable person. However, a person can have more than one role. This matrix will help you a lot. Imagine that during an incident, you figure out that the admin credentials of a server was compromised due to a vulnerability. So you need to disable the user account and patch the server. If you look at this matrix, you know you have to contact the account manager to reset the password and the patching manager to get the server patched. As we have the contact information for those guys defined in the stakeholders list, it is easy to find those guys and how to reach them. That's pretty cool, right? Alright, now let's talk about the definitions of the incident response plan, which includes the data type definition and the incident severity definition. The data classification is very important to define which data is critical, or in other words, to define what is the treasure of the company. This classification will vary from company to company, since it depends on the business. For example, if you're doing this documentation for a consultant's company, the client information may be critical, while for a research company, the internal documents may be their treasure. This classification will be used mainly for incident prioritization and reporting, so it is very important to have the data types well defined. So remember that company ABC is the financial and consultants company. So yeah, their data classification is this. For them, customer data is critical. If it is leaked, they may lose business and get sued. So customer data is their top priority. Also, HR data is very important for them, since they have the social insurance number of every employee. Confidential information is considered as a high priority. And the list goes on. Another very important definition is the incident severity. Basically, this defines how critical an incident is. This criticality should be based on 3 factors. First, the attack criticality. For example, an SQL injection is a very critical attack, while a cross-site scripting is a medium attack. The second factor is like data criticality, which we discussed in the previous slide. And the last factor is the confidence in the detection. For example, how sure are we that an account was compromised? Did we see some failed authentications? Or the user actually reported that someone used their account? Those 3 factors are very important to define the severity. And also, this incident severity is used to direct efforts to the most impactful incidents. So our analysts can focus on the most critical issues first. The incident severity can be defined using a simple Excel table. For example, for the company ABC, I created this incident classification chart. Taking a quick look, it is easy to see how the incidents are classified. For example, if you see a medium attack, such as compromising credentials, but in a critical data server, then the incident is critical. But if the same medium attack is seen in a low priority data server, then the incident is classified as low. Remember, never copy and paste things. So whenever doing your incident response plan, talk to your CISO and define this table according to your company. The core of an incident response plan is the incident response process. So let's talk about it in more details. As I mentioned at the beginning of this course, this incident response process defines the step-by-step of how an incident is treated. Meaning, it defines each task during an investigation, as well as the owner of each task. This process is essential to ensure all stakeholders are aligned during incident, and also to ensure they all know what to do when things happen. The process should include tasks from both security and non-security teams, since sometimes during incident, you may need help from other teams. The process should also specify the teams that own each task, so you can easily identify who is responsible for what. So the incident response process can be broken down into phases. First, we have the detection phase, which is when we get an alert from the SIEM, when the user calls to report an incident, or any other detection method. Then we have the triage, in which we identify the data type, the attack type, and classify the incident into a severity. With that done, we can perform an initial investigation to better understand the incident and the actors. Then, we contain the incident, which means stopping the threat as fast as we can. Then, we eradicate the threat, which means identifying the root cause of the incident and fixing the problem. Then, we have the recovery phase, in which we restore the systems back to normal. And the closure, in which we write the lessons learned and close the ticket. So let me give you an analogy that will help you to understand each phase. Imagine there's a house that is on fire. The smoke detectors detect the smoke and start to beep. And this is the detection phase. Then, you realize the fire is on the garage and on the backyard. As the garage has a lot of flammable things, you put priority on the garage. And this is the triage process. Then, you see that the fire is consuming some electric cables, so you cannot throw water on it. And this is the investigation phase. Then, you get a fire extinguisher and put the fire out. This is the containment phase. Then you go and analyze why the fire started, and realize it was because of a short circuit in your equipment. So you turn off the electricity, repair the cables, and buy a new appliance. And also, you buy a new fuse, so short circuits will not happen again. And this is the eradication phase. Then, you go and paint the garage, so it looks new again. And this is the recovery phase. And last, you tell everyone else how important it is to have a fuse to avoid short circuit, and how important it is to have a fire extinguisher. And this is the closure. So remember the company ABC. Let's take a look on the incident response process that I created for them. This is a simplified response process, because writing every single step would not fit in this slide. However, this gives you a good idea of how the incident response flows. Everything starts on the ticket creation. This can be a user calling to report an incident, or any of your security tools alerting for an incident. Then we have the triage, where you take a quick look on the incident details and check if the incident is a false positive. If it is, then you can close the incident. If it's not, then you check the criticality of the incident. If it's critical, you send it to the critical incident response process, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. If it is not critical, you go for the normal initial investigation. The analysts check the incident and come up with a way to contain it. Then, the incident containment tasks are sent to the support teams. For example, a ticket is opened to the network team to close a firewall port, or a ticket is sent to the account administrators to disable an account. And after that, the SOC analyst can perform a deep investigation, in which you want to find the root cause of the incident. Once you find the root cause, the analyst goes and opens a ticket to the support teams so they can fix the issue. For example, this can be patching a system. And once the system is patched, the security team checks to see if the issue is solved. If not, it goes back to the deep investigation part. If it's solved, then the analyst updates the ticket with the solution and investigation steps. Then, if it's necessary, the analyst can trigger the system recovery part. After the recovery, the analyst updates the knowledge base to put anything that was done in the incident. So if it happens again, the next analyst will know how to deal with the incident. And after that, all is left to do is to close the ticket. That's pretty cool, right? This is a simple but effective process. In your case, you may need to modify to add or remove any steps. Now that we have the overall picture of the process, we can create the descriptions for each task. This is very important to give the SOC team more details on how to perform each task. There are several ways of describing the process. Some people like long text blocks, but I personally like short and objective tables. Personally, what I like to do is to create a small table like this for each step of the process. For example, this table you're seeing gives more information on the triage part of the process. This table contains what is the input for the task and what is the output, so the team knows what to expect and what to deliver. Also, it has the name of the responsible team. And it also contains a description of what should be done. For example, for triage, the security operation has a responsibility of checking the basic information in the ticket and determining if it's a false positive, as well as the ticket criticality. For example, for the triage, the description is what you see on your screen. And this will give the analyst a good insight of what should be done in each step. So all you have to do is to write a table like this for each step in your process. In case of a critical incident, you may have a separated process to expedite the investigation. This critical incident response process is invoked only in confirmed critical or sensitive incidents. For example, in a large data leak, or in an employee-related crime, or when the attack is disseminated, or when you realize you are dealing with professional hackers. The idea here is basically getting all the key stakeholders in a meeting room. And this is also called the CERT team, which stands for Computer Emergency Response Team. This team should include both technical and business people. The idea is reducing the communication issues and investigation time by having everyone together in one place. But very important to remember, just because an incident is critical, it doesn't mean that you can forget about the process. Even in a critical incident, the process should be followed and all the decisions should be recorded in an incident report. To better prepare the team for incidents, we need to define the incident scenarios. The idea of creating incident scenarios is to identify attack vectors and their criticality. And that includes identifying actors, systems, and teams that can be involved in an incident. And this is very useful to prepare the team for the incident by rehearsing the incident and measuring the team performance. The incident scenarios will vary from company to company. So when creating scenarios for your company, you should consider the classic incidents, such as ransomware, stolen credentials, brute forcing, and etc. But also considering some client-specific scenarios. For example, for company ABC, one concern is when client credentials are compromised, or when a vendors get infected with ransomware. Also, a good source of information can be the SIEM solution of the company. You can ask your SOC manager what are the most frequent incidents and which are the most critical incidents. Those should be your priority when creating incident scenarios. So for company ABC, those are the incident scenarios that we will be tackling. First, ransomware, which is a critical incident. Then, data leakage, which could be through SQL injection, is also a critical incident. Then, stolen admin credentials, and so on. Now that we have the incident scenarios, we can create incident procedures, which tells what should be done in case of a specific incident type. The idea is very similar to a knowledge base, but more formal and with KPIs. What I want to do is to create incident procedures for the most relevant scenarios. For example, for the most critical ones and for the most occurring instance. Those procedures should contain very detailed step-by-step of how to handle the specific incident type. And the good thing is that those procedures can be rehearsed with the team. For example, you can have a ransomware simulation and make the team follow the procedure, so they can practice the scenario and they can observe where the procedure could be improved. So let me give a couple of examples of procedures. The first one is a simple lost or stolen laptop procedure. The symptom is simple. The user contacts the security team reporting a stolen laptop, and the IT security team is responsible for investigating it. The investigation steps are: first you check the laptop assigned to the employee, then you check if the disk was encrypted, then you check for any unusual VPN logins, and so on. The remediation steps are: first, if the laptop was stolen, you contact the local police. If the disk was not encrypted, you monitor the dark web forums for company data. Also, you should reset the user password and add some monitoring rules for user abnormal behavior. The second example is a little bit more complex. It is a ransomware outbreak. The symptoms can be various. It can be a user contacting the security team reporting a screen, or a very high level of disk read and write events, or even the SIEM solution reporting anomalous disk behavior. The investigation team is the IT security, but it also needs the help from the IT operations. The investigation steps are: log into the machine and check for unusual process, encrypted files, or malicious messages. And to remediate, the steps are: first you isolate the machine from the network, then you identify which type of ransomware, then if it's possible you turn off the machine, and so on. And of course, this procedure will vary according to the specific type of ransomware, but it is a good base for the incident response team. Some security specialists argue that communication is the most important part of an incident. And that includes internal communications as well as external communications. To be honest, we could spend hours here talking only about the communication plan, but let's have an overview of what is in the communication plan. The first item that a communication plan should have is an escalation plan. This is similar to a stakeholder hierarchy. The idea is understanding who reports to who, so we can have an escalation path for instance. Each level of the escalation plan should have a response time. For example, if you call a manager and he doesn't answer, you should wait a few minutes and try again before escalating it. The escalation plan may vary according to the classification of the incident. So, let me give an example of escalation plan for the ABC company. The first level, which means the first person to be contacted if an incident is detected, is the SOC analyst. As you can see, I put their contact information and the response time, which should be 1 hour for the majority of incidents or 10 minutes for critical incidents. Then, the second level is the SOC manager, which has a 4-hour response time for general incidents or 30 minutes for critical incidents. Which means, if you are trying to contact the manager for more than 30 minutes during a critical incident, and he or she doesn't answer, you can then escalate it for the next level, which is the security director. If the security director also doesn't answer in the mentioned time, then the last level is the CISO. Another very interesting artifact in a communication plan is the incident racing matrix, which is very similar to the plan racing matrix, but here we use specific incident scenarios. For example, if it's a low priority incident with no data leak, the SOC analyst is responsible and the manager is accountable. But if it's a high priority incident with data leak, the HR manager and the CISO should be informed. So far, we have talked about the internal communication plan, but we also have the external communication plan, which is extremely important in critical incident and data leaks. This plan involves the communication to any external parties, being that vendors, law enforcement agencies, or media. Also, from a public image perspective, having appropriate periodic communication throughout an incident can be key for client trust. You see that the difference between the companies that survive to a massive hack is the good communication throughout the incident. One important thing is to remember that only one person should release information to the media, and this person can be the CEO or a public relations specialist. I do not recommend technical people talking directly to the media, since technical people are not prepared for media questions. Another very important thing to remember is that an external communication plan should be written in conjunction with a PR specialist and a legal team, since large hacks can trigger legal actions. Also, when writing an external communication plan, take a look on the NIST industry standard, especially on the section 2.3.4. It contains very detailed information about how to deal with external communications. Alright, since we have the main components of an incident response plan, now we can perform the incident simulations. The idea of an incident simulation is to rehearse the plan and process to observe its fluency. The simulations can be done based on the incident scenarios that we identified, and this will help you to identify any broken process or bottlenecks. Once this is identified, then you can improve the process documentation, fixing the issues found. The incident simulations are also interesting to give hands-on experience for both technical and non-technical people. So when a real incident happens, they feel more confident when taking decisions. A very important thing during incident simulation is having an observer, which can be you. The idea is taking note of every action that the team takes without interfering on it. For example, if the team commits a mistake, take a note and don't say anything at the moment. Later, you can analyze what they had the mistake and try to improve the process based on what you saw. Some examples of incident simulations are ransomware outbreaks, in which you can evaluate how long does it take to contain the malware or if all the machines have proper backups. Another example of incident simulation is compromised credentials, or malware infections, or denial of service, and so on. Amazing, we cover all the main items that an incident response plan should have. So let me show you how the company ABC incident response plan looks like. In the first section, we have an introduction, which states the plan objectives and also contains the management approvals of the plan. Then, in the second section, we have the stakeholders. This section contains the company hierarchy, the contact information of the key stakeholders, and the racing matrix for the plan. Then, in the third section, we have the definitions, which includes the data classification and the incident severity definition. Then, in the fourth section, we have the incident response process, which includes an overview of the process, a description of each task, and a guideline of what to do in case of a critical incident. Then, in the fifth section, we have the incident scenarios, which includes a list of each scenario and also the main incident procedures. In the sixth section, we have the communication plan. Depending on the size of your company, you may have this section in a separated document, but in here, I put it together. This communication plan includes information about the internal escalation, the incident racing metrics, and the guidelines on external communications. But keep in mind that this is an incident response plan for a specific company. It doesn't mean that for your company, you have the exact same sections or content. As I mentioned, you should write your document for your specific company. So before closing this module, let's talk about the keys for success in designing the project plan, as well as the keys for failure. The first key for success is to write a custom plan for the company. Having a generic plan will only make people ignore your documents. Another key for success is having one person assigned as accountable for each task. Also, it is very important to segregate the roles and responsibilities, and clearly state them on the document. Only in this way, you can avoid people passing the responsibility during incident. Also, having a good communication plan for both internal and external parties is essential. And if you want to have an effective plan, you should review the process with all stakeholders and perform incident rehearsals. Now, the keys for failure. If you use templates from the internet, that's a way to get your document forgotten. And same is valid for reusing documents from previous companies. Just don't do that. Another very common mistake is expecting people to know their roles by common sense. You shouldn't expect that. It may be redundant writing that the patching analyst is responsible for patching. But trust me, it is better to have it written down. Another common mistake is having more than one person accountable for a task. In this way, people may be passing the bucket during an incident. And the last most common mistake is reviewing the incident process only once a year, usually before the audit. If you really care about your process performance, you should check it properly twice a year or when you feel that things are not working well. In this module, we talk about recovery plans and procedures. The idea of having well-defined recovery plans and procedures is to recover systems in a systematic and efficient way. You may have seen this before. During incident, people that have no clue on what they're doing trying to recover the systems. Believe me, once I saw an analyst dropping all the tables from all databases while he was trying to import the backup into one database. If he had a well-defined step-by-step on how to recover this database, I'm sure he would not have mistakes. And that's exactly what I want to achieve here. A planned and efficient way of recovering from incidents. So before starting this module, let's take a look on what we'll be seeing here. Those topics are exactly what a recovery plan should have. We start by an overview of the recovery plans and procedures. Then, we talk about how to define who is involved in a recovery procedure. Then, we talk about how to create the recovery scenarios, which are basically the recovery tasks. Then, we talk about how to understand the environment and how we can get prepared so when the incident happens, we can recover faster. Then, we talk about the recovery procedures itself and how to design an effective step-by-step. Then, I will present to you some examples of procedures so you can take a look on how things are done in real life. And finally, we close up this module by discussing some keys for success when writing your recovery procedures. So let's get started by understanding what are the recovery plans. Basically, this is a set of straightforward procedures to recover systems as quickly and efficient as possible. Those procedures should be written in conjunction with support teams. And that's because most likely it is the support teams that will be executing the recovery procedures. However, during the recovery, the security team should oversee the recovery process to ensure the systems are restored properly and with high levels of security. For example, let's say your server got compromised because of operational system vulnerability, and due to the attack, the server had to be reimaged. So you need to ensure that the server is reimaged properly and that the server is fully patched to avoid the same vulnerability to be exploited. If you restore the system, but the system has the same security issues than before, then you get attacked again. Also, it is important to remember that those procedures are for technical people, so they should contain very detailed step-by-step instructions. The more information, the better. As any documentation, the recovery procedures should contain a list of who is involved with the tasks. The reason for this is that we can define the roles and responsibilities and avoid people passing the responsibility during incident. Also, the stakeholder section of this document should contain the contact information for all the involved parties, so it is easy to contact people during an incident. To create the recovery procedures, first we need to think about the recovery scenarios. The recovery scenarios are similar to the incident scenarios, but for recovery situations. For example, an incident scenario is a ransomware, while a recovery scenario could be restore database from backup. Keep in mind that one recovery scenario may apply to multiple incident scenarios. For example, the procedure restoring database from backup would apply to several incidents, such as ransomware, SQL injections, and so on. And again, here's the same as incident scenarios. We should create procedures for the most critical and most frequent recovery scenarios. For example, for business critical servers, user laptops, and etc. To design a proper recovery procedure for a scenario, first you have to understand the environment that is related to the scenario. There are 3 factors that are crucial when designing the procedure for a recovery scenario. The first one is understanding the technology, which means understanding how the solution is implemented, where the backup files are, how often the backup is done, any external integrations, and potential attack paths. The second factor that you need to understand is people that could be related to the scenario. For example, who is the solution owner, who is the technical specialist, which support teams manage the solution, and so on. And the third factor is understanding the process, which means understanding the backup and recovery process, reading the company business continuity plan, and so on. Only after understanding the technology, people, and process is that you're ready to design a recovery procedure. There are several things we can do before an incident to make the recovery process faster. For example, you can have a custom pre-made operational system image. So if you need to reimage your server, you can do it quickly. Also, if your company works with virtual machines, you can have a set of virtual machine templates. Also, you can have the copies of the application configuration files, so you can easily reconfigure the solutions after an attack. And that's same for appliance. For example, you can have a copy of your firewall rules or even a script that auto-configure the firewall. And this will speed up a lot your recovery process. Also, a mandatory thing, you should have a periodic backups of pretty much everything. And also very important, having recovery process and procedures is a good preparation from when things really happen. Probably the support teams of your company already adopt some of those tasks. If not, discuss with them to implement it. Being prepared will save a lot of time during incident. Also, important to remember, those artifacts should be updated regularly. For example, if your virtual machine templates is from 3 years ago, it probably has a lot of missing patches and security vulnerabilities. So make sure that those artifacts are constantly updated, so then when you restore the system, you're not vulnerable. Now that we know the preparation, let's talk about the step-by-step that every procedure should have. As I mentioned, this document is for technical people, so the step-by-step should be very detailed. Take a look on this procedure related to restoring a database. In the first section, we have how to collect the backup file from the backup server. And this includes logging into the server using SSH, going to the backup folder, transferring the file, and exiting the server. Then, in the second section, we have how to actually import the backup into the database, which starts with logging to the database server, then going to the backup folder, and so on. Note that this step-by-step contains very detailed information, for example, the IP of the backup server. It also contains the commands itself, such as how to SSH and how to transfer files using SCP. And this is very important because during an incident, the analyst can follow these steps, avoiding any mistakes when executing the commands. So let's put everything together and take a look on how a procedure looks like. Let's use the same example of a database restore procedure. In the first section of the document, we have the introduction, stating what is the scope of this document, what is required for this procedure to work, and who should approve the execution if we need to restore the database. In the second section, we have the stakeholders, which include the supervising team and the execution team. For both, you should have a list with contact information. In the third section, we have the procedure itself, which includes the preparation steps, the procedure step-by-step, and the procedure details, containing any additional information required. And in the last section, we can have a troubleshooting section, which may contain the most common issues and how to solve them. It could also have the vendor contact information, in case people need to call the solution vendor for help. Once you have the security procedures ready, you can then perform recovery drills. Recovery drills are basically used to testing the recovery plans and procedures by actually following the step-by-step. During the drill, you should take a note of the gaps in the procedure. You can also ask the analyst to give you feedback on the procedure so you can improve the document. Also, during the drill, you can measure the time to recover, which can be a KPI for the team. And also very important, any recovery drill should be scheduled with the support teams and must be approved by solution owners. Never do any restoring without the consent of the people responsible for the solution. So to wrap up this module, let's take a look on the keys for success and the keys for failure when writing a recovery procedure. The first key for success is to develop a recovery plan and procedures with help of the support team. Remember, most likely, it will be them that will be executing the steps, so they should be involved on the creation of procedures. Also, it is important to read the company business plans, so you can understand what the business expects from a recovery perspective. Also, the security analysts should be able to test the system after the recovery and to ensure there are no security vulnerabilities on the restored system. And last, but in my opinion, most important key for success, it is performing periodic drills. At least once a year, you should simulate an incident and perform a full system recovery. And that's the only way to ensure that the process and technology is ready for an incident. The first key for failure is the most common one, which is expecting that the teams know how to recover by common sense. If you think, oh, I don't need a procedure. They are the database team, so they should know how to restore a backup. If you think like this, then you have issues in the future. Another key for failure is creating a procedure without consulting the support teams. And last key for failure, which is also very common, is having a procedure but never testing it. Think about that. How can you know that your systems are ready if you never tested it? And trust me, it is better having a failure during a drill than a failure in the middle of an incident. Now that we discussed about the security plan and the communication plan, we can explore other documents, such as the security procedures. Those documents will improve a lot the performance of your security team. Security procedures is all about performing tasks in a methodical and efficient way. The idea is understanding the main tasks of your security team, understanding how things are done, and proposing improved procedures. Those procedures will save you time and reduce the mistakes of your security analysts. So, before starting this module, let's take a quick look on what we'll be covering in here. We start by having an overview of what the procedures are and how they can help you. Then, we learn how to gather information and understand what people currently do. Then, with that done, we can then analyze what could be improved. And with that in mind, we can then define the roles and responsibilities and write the procedure step by step, which is the core of this document. In this module, we also cover some examples of procedures and how you can rehearse the procedures to ensure they are as effective as possible. And, as in the previous modules, we have the keys for success when writing your security procedures. So, to get started, let's formalize what a procedure is. Basically, a procedure is a document that describes how to perform the main security tasks. Those tasks could be related to incident investigation or not. As I mentioned before, the security procedures provide standardization during activities, so you can ensure that all analysts will be doing their job in the same way. Also, usually, procedure documents are divided by technology. So for example, I could have one document for my firewalls. Inside this document, I could have several procedures related to this technology. For example, how to create rules, how to capture network traffic, and so on. Another example of a procedure document could be regarding my DLP solution, which stands for Data Loss Prevention Solution. Inside this document, I could have a procedure explaining how to install the DLP agent, how to troubleshoot if an agent is offline, and so on. You may be wondering why we have this, since analysts could simply Google how to do things. And the reason for that is that we want to ensure that all analysts will do the same procedure, and that this procedure is rehearsed and works in your specific environment. Also, the procedures have very specific information about your environment, such as IP address, business owners, and specific commands for your environment version. From my previous experience, I see a lot of people mixing the concepts of process and procedures. So, to have everyone on the same page, a process is a high-level explanation of something. It is basically a sequence of tasks that tells you what to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do. Also, usually, processes are not specific to a technology. It's more like a high-level thing. On the other hand, we have the procedures. Basically, a procedure is a detailed technical guideline. The procedure is specific to a task and tells you how to do things. And in contrast to a process, a procedure usually is specific to a technology since it contains a lot of details on how to do things. Writing a security procedure is more than copying and pasting a tutorial from Google. If you want to write an effective procedure that improves your security team performance, then you should analyze things in more detail. A good approach for writing a security procedure is as follows. First, you should list the main technologies. For example, your firewalls, DLP solutions, antivirus, and etc. Then, you need to figure out who are the technical owners of each technology. Then, you can interview the technical owner and the security team to list the main tasks related to specific technology. Then, once you have that, you can write down the roles and responsibilities and write the step by step. With that done, you can finalize the document by rehearsing the procedure and improving what you wrote. So let's take a look in more details on each step. The first step is gathering the information we need to write our security procedure. The first thing is to gather the list of technologies that your security team is responsible for. For example, the antivirus, the data loss prevention, the SIEM solution, and so on. To get this information, the best person to ask is the security manager of the security teams. The second piece of information you need is who are the technical owners of each technology. And by that, I mean a security analyst or a security engineer that knows a lot about the tool and is responsible for it. And with that done, you can then discuss with the technical owner the main security tasks. The idea here is identifying the most recurring tasks as well as the most critical tasks and tricky tasks, which are tasks that if it goes wrong can cause high damage. Now that we know the technology, the people, and the tasks, we can then take some time to observe how people currently do their job. The idea is understanding how things are done, so then we can discuss improvements with the technology experts. For example, if you see an analyst performing an update in production without even testing in the test environment, you can flag this to the technology expert and ask how to be the best way to ensure that only well-tested updates are performed in production. Also, by observing how people perform their tasks and by discussing with the technology experts, you can define what are the most common mistakes and how can they be prevented. Perfect. Now that we know the technology, the people, the tasks, and how to perform them, we can see and define the roles and responsibilities of each procedure, which means defining who is responsible for approving, executing, and testing a certain task. This is mainly to avoid miscommunication issues and the lack of ownership, since every time a task is executed, we will have someone approving it and testing it. Having the roles and responsibilities well defined also improves the success rate, since only authorized people will perform tasks on the tool. For example, let's say that inside of my antivirus procedure document, I have one procedure that teaches how to create a user. So then, I will need to have a small table like this, showing who is responsible for creating the user, which in this case is the security access analyst. Also, who is responsible for approving the task, which is the HR and the security managers. And last, who is responsible for testing, which in this case is the final user, that will try to log into his account and tell if it works or not. Once we have the tasks, the roles and responsibilities, we can then write the most important part of the procedure, which is the step-by-step teaching how to do the tasks. One very important thing to remember is that the public of the document is the technical staff, meaning that the step-by-step should be very detailed in technical information, including explanations of the step-by-step, screenshots of how to do things, and the commands that have to be executed. One thing that I always do after finishing writing a step-by-step is giving it to a person with zero knowledge in the tool and see if the person can follow it. If yes, that's perfect. Also, keep in mind that the step-by-step should be written by a technology specialist, but with your supervision to ensure that the common mistakes and the improvements observed in the analysis part are now fixed in the procedure step by step. So let me give you a couple of examples of a procedure step by step. The first one is a procedure related to firewall technology. And the step by step is to teach you how to create a new firewall rule. The first step is to log into the firewall web interface. And note here that I put a URL for the web interface, so the person can just copy and paste this in their browser. The second step says to go to the Rule tab on the left side menu. The third step says to click in New, and so on. That's pretty simple, right? Also, keep in mind that I couldn't put screenshots here because it would make this slide impossible to read. But in your document, you should have the screenshots of the main steps. Let me give you a second example. Let's say I have a data loss prevention solution, or DLP solution. One of the procedures could be how to install the DLP agent in a new machine. The step-by-step is as follows. Note that is in the step 1, 4, and 6, I put the exact information that the person will need to execute in that step. And this is very important. Amazing. Now that we know all parts of a security procedure, let's put everything together. Let me give you an example of a security procedure, which in this case is a document describing all the main tasks related to our DLP solution. So, the document starts with an introduction section, in which you write an overview and the scope of the document. Then, in the second section, we have the procedures itself. For example, the first procedure is the DLP agent installation. Inside of this procedure, we have a quick overview, the roles and responsibilities for that specific task, and, most important, the step-by-step showing how to perform that specific task. Pretty cool, right? We also have other procedures in this document, such as how to run the DLP scan, how to troubleshoot an offline agent, and so on. It is a very straightforward document, but that will improve a lot the performance of your team. Now that we have the procedures defined, we should test them to make sure they are easy to understand and that the team is comfortable while executing the steps. And this can be done by giving the procedure to an analyst that is not a technology specialist and ask him to perform each task. During the rehearsal, you should analyze the gaps and what could be improved. This means analyzing which points the analyst has questions and if at any moment the analyst gets an error or something unexpected. By doing that, you can identify the common mistakes and avoid them by writing more details on the procedure. For example, let's say you observe that during an antivirus agent installation, the analyst used an outdated installer. Then you can update your procedure. For example, put a statement saying that the analyst should ensure that they're using the latest agent and giving them the link for where the latest installer can be found. Awesome. Now, before wrapping up, let's take a look at some keys for success and keys for failure when writing a security procedure. The first key for success is writing a very detailed step-by-step, including comments and screenshots. Also, another key for success is reviewing the procedures with technology specialists and rehearsing the procedure with every analyst that is responsible for the tool. And last, but maybe most important, ensuring that the team is aware of the procedures and ensuring that the team is comfortable following them. Now, the keys for failure. The first key for failure is writing a high-level tutorial without any detail. Also, another key for failure is copying the tutorial from the internet. Forget that. We are writing procedures because you want a custom step-by-step. We want procedures that were well tested in your environment, so we have no surprises when executing it. Another key for failure is to not include details of the server and how to get access to it. If the person needs to access the tool, then explain how it is done and what is the address to the tool. And the last key for failure is to not define the approvers. If you don't do that, it can be a mess since the analyst may be doing tasks without the consent of some key people in the company. So make sure you have the approvers defined and that people ask approval before doing any important task. Awesome, I hope you enjoyed this module as much as I did. Now that we have all the main documentation sorted out, it is time to take a look in some other artifacts that will improve your security team performance. For example, having all your documentation organized in a repository can avoid that the team executes an outdated procedure during an incident. In this module, we'll talk about some additional artifacts, such as knowledge bases, documentation repositories, and much more. The idea of implementing additional artifacts is pushing the team performance to higher standards. Sometimes just having the formal documentation is not enough, and we need more dynamic ways of sharing information. For example, writing an incident procedure for every single incident type may be impossible. So for simple incidents, we can use a knowledge base that the analysts can update whenever they want. Again, the idea is trying to improve the performance of the team by giving them artifacts that will help them on their daily tasks. So to get this module started, let's take a look on what we'll be covering here. First, we already started by an overview of the module and how the security artifacts will help you. Then, next, we will talk about the cybersecurity repository that will help you to organize your documentation and create baselines. Then, we'll talk about other support documentation that will help your security team in their daily tasks. Next, we talk about the knowledge base, which is a very common artifact to share information across the teams. And then, we talk about the internal reviews and external audits, which are very interesting to define the maturity of the team. Then, we talk about process evaluation and how you can measure the performance of your team with numbers. And then, we talk about the lessons learned reviews, which are done after a significant incident. And as this is the last module of our course, we will have a course closure section, in which you have a quick review of what was learned and what you can start to do today. Once you have your documentation done, one of the most important artifacts to have is a cybersecurity repository, which basically is a shared folder that centralizes all the documentation in one place. The idea of having this shared folder is to avoid people using outdated documents, since everyone will be checking the documents from the same place. Also, some repository tools provide versioning, meaning that you can create a documentation baseline and even check previous versions of the documents. Also, some solutions shows you who changed the documents, which can be interesting. You can use any document sharing solution to create a documentation repository. However, my favorite ones are the SVN, the CVS, the Office 365, or the Google Documents. The first two ones are fully free and open source, so you have no excuse to not use them. Just to give an example of how to organize your documentation, take a look in this repository diagram. From top to bottom, we first have a folder called Cybersecurity Repository. Inside this root folder, we have three folders: the documentation folder, the incident case folder, and the report folders. Inside of the documentation folder, you can create subfolders to better organize your documentation. For example, you can have a folder called Environment Information, which contains network diagrams, asset lists, contact sheets, and etc. You can have another subfolder called Incident Response, which contains your incident handling procedures, your incident response plan, and your communication plan. Then you can also have another subfolder called Operational Documentation, containing the security procedures, the technology guidelines, and much more. You can have another folder called Team Documents, with the team contact information, the team CVs, internal meeting minutes, and etc. And inside this documentation folder, you can also have a folder called Support Documentation, with forms, templates, and vendor documentation. Another folder of our cybersecurity repository is the Cyber Incident Cases, in which we could have subfolders, one for each incident. And those folders should contain evidence of the incident, forms, and time tracking spreadsheets. And the last folder in your cybersecurity repository is the Reports folder, in which you could have any kind of periodic reports, such as vulnerability reports, patching reports, and so on. But again, this repository structure is just a suggestion. In your company, you can modify the structure according to your needs. Apart from the documentation that we created, there are a few other simple artifacts that can improve the efficiency of the tasks. One of those artifacts is templates. If you create templates for the most recurring tasks, you improve the performance and it creates standardization in the communications. For example, you could have an instant time tracking template, or a PowerPoint template for your meetings, and so on. Another support artifact are forms. You could create forms to make standard requests. For example, you could have a form for firewall rule changes, in which you could predefine which information the team needs when requesting a firewall rule change. Another form could be an evidence handling form, and any other form that you can imagine to improve the process. Knowledge bases are important to centralize and organize the knowledge of the team, since everything will be in one place. Also, having a knowledge base improves and standardizes the incident response, since all analysts will be consulting the same source of information. Most of people think that knowledge bases are only important in large security teams, but that's not true. Having a knowledge base is also important in small security teams because it helps to keep the knowledge in the company. For example, if you have only 2 security analysts and they don't document the knowledge anywhere, if you lose one analyst, you'll be losing a lot of knowledge. You can use any solution for creating a knowledge base you want, including a wiki, a WordPress site, an Office 365 site, or any other solution. The most important part is not the technology, it's the team using the knowledge base. So let me show you an example of a knowledge base post. Take a look on this example. The general idea is keeping as simple as possible, but including all the necessary information to perform the task. For example, this post is about how to extract the monthly vulnerability report. You can put some tags, such as report and vulnerability, to make it easy to find the post. Also, most of the knowledge base solutions let you put a category, and they also store the name of who created the post. In the description, you should put a very technical and detailed step-by-step of what should be done. If it is possible, also add screenshots. Keep in mind that the knowledge base posts are more adequate for non-critical tasks, such as extracting reports and doing small changes. If it is a critical task, such as ransomware incident response, for example, then you should write an incident procedure. Internal periodic reviews and external audits are very important to identify gaps in documentation as well as gaps in processes. The idea is to have an external pair of eyes looking at the security team and their daily activities to identify which processes are not being followed, as well as identify what could be improved. Each company have their own review and audit cycle, but my suggestion is to have an internal review twice a year and an external independent audit every year. Sometimes evaluating if your processes are working or not can be challenging. KPIs, which stands for Key Performance Indicators, provide ways to measure the process performance. Having numbers that represent the performance can help you to improve your team performance by tracking the progress. For example, you can measure your KPIs once a month and observe trends, so you can see if the team performance is improving or not. Most of the security standards, such as PCI, ISO, and NIST, already have a set of KPIs. So if you follow any of those standards, I do recommend you checking them out. Just so you have an idea of what a security KPI is, take a look in those examples. First, the time to solve an incident is an indicator of how fast your team is reacting to an incident. Also, another KPI is time to close an incident, which means not only resolving the incident, but also identifying the root cause and fixing the issue, like patching the vulnerability, for example. Another KPI could be time to solve vulnerabilities, so you can see how fast your patching team is. But as I mentioned before, take a look on the security standards and select the KPIs that make sense to your company. Lessons learned meetings are a very important step to be performed after substantial incidents. The idea is reviewing the incident as a whole and identifying what could have been better in both incident response and incident prevention. For example, in terms of incident response, you can analyze if the process were followed, if the forms were filled, and etc. In terms of incident prevention, you can analyze why the incident happened. For example, understand if there were any technology gaps, or any unpatched systems, or maybe the problem was the user training, and so on. Those lessons learned meetings should involve all the incident stakeholders, including the security analyst that works on the case, the SOC manager, the CISO, and any other stakeholder from other affected teams, such as the patching team or network team. One very common way of doing lessons learned is using the SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. I will explain you the SWOT analysis in the next slide, but what you have to remember is that we do this so we can define a list of actions that will reduce the likelihood of this incident happening again. So, the SWOT analysis. The easiest way of doing this is getting all the stakeholders in a meeting room, getting a whiteboard, and drawing those 4 boxes: the strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. So let's say we had a ransomware attack due to a user clicking a phishing email. In the strengths box, we write everything that was done well, so we can see what was good and keep doing those good things. In this ransomware case, the detection was quick, and the SOC level 1 responded to the incident very quickly, which is amazing. In the weakness boxes, we write what we could have done better, so we can avoid that happening in the future. In this ransomware, the main problem is that the laptop was not fully patched and that the user clicked in a suspicious link. Then, in the opportunity box, we write what are the opportunities to make the company safer. For example, provide user security awareness training, provide phishing simulations, improve patching, and etc. And in the threat box, we write what are the main threats to your security in terms of this specific ransomware case. For example, the main problem is unaware users, and especially the non-IT personnel, such as the HR and marketing people. Those are the ones most likely to click in phishing links. With this analysis, you can then define a list of tasks that can improve your security and reduce the likelihood of a user getting phished again. The post-analysis list is a very simple list that breaks down all the improvement opportunities into a list of actions, with deadlines and owners. So, considering our SWOT analysis from our ransomware incident, I created this task list. As you can see, those are well-defined tasks, with an owner and update date, meaning that the owner should provide some update by this day. This will help to keep people accountable on their tasks. As example, the first task would be creating a phishing simulation program, and the person responsible for organizing this is Ricardo. The second task would be procuring a security awareness vendor to provide security awareness training to our threat group, which is HR and marketing. And the list of tasks go on. The important thing to remember is that here we translate the high-level analysis into a list of actionable tasks with well-defined owners and deadlines. Congratulations, this is the last part of our Cyber Incident Response course. But wait, before we go, let's do a quick review of what we learned, and let's see what you can start to do right now to improve your incident response. So, let's take a moment to see what we learned in this course. We started by discussing about the Cyber Incident Response Plan, which is the main part of this course. Then, we talk about an incident response process, which is part of the general incident response plan and defines how the team will react when an incident happens. Then we talk about the communication plan, which is very important in large incidents, since one of the sections define how to deal with external communications. Also, we talk about incident rehearsals, which in my opinion is what makes a security team ready for the real instance. We also talk about the recovery plans, which defines how to restore systems after an incident. Then, we talk about the incident procedures, which give technical details of how to act in case of a specific incident. Then, we talked about security procedures that can help you to improve your security team performance in their daily tasks. And in the last part of this course, we talk about additional artifacts, such as the documentation repository and the knowledge base, which will improve the performance of your team. I know, a lot of stuff, right? I hope those topics will be useful for you and your company. So as any module, let's have a keys for success and keys for failure when doing the documentation and analysis of your security team. The first key for success is to customize the documentation for your company. Forget about using default templates. Each company is different from each other. The second key for success is getting input from key stakeholders, meaning from the CISO to the security analysts. The third key for success is rehearsing the process and procedures until your team is comfortable with them. It is also important to observe the team while the rehearsal, so you can identify gaps and propose improvements. And the last key for success is measuring the team performance and creating a high-level improvement roadmap, so you can always be improving. As keys for failure, we have few. First, if you're only writing documentation for the upcoming audit, then you're already starting wrong. Also, if you only consider management input when writing documentation, your document will be high level and will not have very important information from the people that are actually doing the job, such as the security analysts and security engineers. Also, another very common mistake is assuming that people know how to do their tasks. Trust me, it's better having something well documented than having analysts doing things without any guidance. And last, but maybe most important key for failure, is using templates from the internet without even customizing it. If you don't put effort writing the document, people will not put effort reading it. Alright, so before leaving this course, I want to give you a list of things you can start to do right now, after closing this tab. First, you can start to identify and write down which documents your company has. With this list, you can then create a list of which documents are missing and create a roadmap saying which documents will be created first. The second thing we can start to do right now is observing the security team and identifying the most common mistakes and the performance bottlenecks. By observing that, you can create a list of which artifacts can help the team. For example, if you see that all the time that an analyst has to request a new firewall rule, there is a lot of back and forth between the teams, you can create a firewall request form with standard fields, and that will improve the performance of your team. The third thing you can do is identify which of the current processes are not being followed by the team. With that, you can analyze the process to see if they need to be improved and also to schedule rehearsals with the team so they can get comfortable with the process steps. So, there you go. You have no excuses to not start working on this right now. So that's it. We reached the end of this course. I hope you enjoyed this course as much as I did. And I hope the knowledge you gain here will help you to improve your security team performance. So, thank you for your attention. Ciao.